6 months I'd been seeing him. Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd walk into the gym, head straight to the same treadmill, never spoke to anyone. All I knew about the old man was that he always wore long sweatpants and never complained about anything. Until the day I saw his prosthetic leg. That moment changed everything. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this journey of discovery and the hidden strength that walks among us, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who carry their battles in silence. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm an investigative journalist for the Portland Tribune. But this story isn't about breaking news or political scandals. This is about Walter Johnson, a man who taught me that sometimes the most powerful stories are hidden behind the most ordinary faces. Now, I need you to understand something about being a journalist. We're trained to notice details, to see stories where others see routine. But sometimes, we get so caught up in looking for the big story that we miss the extraordinary person standing right next to us. Walter was proof of that. And what I discovered about him would challenge everything I thought I knew about courage. It started as a coincidence. I joined Riverside Fitness Center 6 months earlier, not for a story, but because my doctor said I needed to manage stress better. Investigative journalism takes its toll, and apparently, my blood pressure was paying the price. Every morning, same routine. Coffee at 6:30, gym by 7 o'clock, treadmill for exactly 30 minutes. That's when I first noticed him. Walter Johnson was probably in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray hair kept military short, shoulders that suggested he'd once been broader, stronger. He moved with a slight limp that I'd attributed to age. Always wore the same outfit. Gray sweatshirt, navy blue sweatpants that were always pulled down to cover his ankles, worn but clean sneakers. What struck me most was his routine. It never varied. Treadmill number 7, always the same speed, exactly 30 minutes. He'd nod politely if you made eye contact, but he never initiated conversation. Never used his phone, never listened to music, just walked, stared straight ahead, and left when his time was up. For weeks, I barely thought about him. He was part of the gym's landscape, like the motivational posters or the broken water fountain by the weights. Just another senior citizen trying to stay healthy. But journalists are curious by nature, and after 3 months of seeing the same person following the exact same routine, I found myself paying more attention. Here's what I didn't know then. Sometimes the most disciplined routines aren't born from habit. They're born from necessity, from trauma, from the need to control something, anything, when everything else has been taken away. Walter's routine wasn't about fitness. It was about survival. And I was about to learn why. There were small things that didn't add up. The way he gripped the treadmill handles, not for balance, but like he was anchoring himself. The way his eyes would scan the room when he thought no one was looking. Military bearing that never quite left, even decades later. I started arriving a few minutes earlier, staying a few minutes later. Not stalking, just observing. Professional curiosity, I told myself. Walter always arrived alone and left alone. He carried a small gym bag that looked like it had seen better decades. His car was an old Ford pickup, probably from the 90s, but meticulously maintained. The kind of attention to detail that spoke of someone who understood that taking care of your equipment could mean the difference between life and death. 3 months in, I decided to introduce myself. Nothing dramatic, just polite conversation between gym regulars. "Morning," I said, stepping onto the treadmill next to his. He glanced over, nodded. "Morning. I'm Sarah. I've seen you here pretty regularly." Walter. He didn't slow his pace or look away from straight ahead. "Do you live in the neighborhood?" "Close enough." That was it. Not rude, just economical with words. The conversation ended there, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, we exchanged brief pleasantries. Weather, traffic, the gym's new hours. Walter was polite but never personal, never mentioned family, work, or anything about his life outside these walls. Then came the day that changed everything. I want you to remember this moment because it's the kind of moment that separates us from the people we think we know. In 30 seconds, everything I thought I understood about Walter Johnson was about to be shattered. And what I discovered would reveal one of the most incredible stories of courage and sacrifice I'd ever encountered. It was a Tuesday morning in October. I'd finished my workout and was heading to the locker room when I heard a commotion near the weight area. Someone had dropped a heavy plate, and the crash had startled everyone, including Walter. He'd been on his usual treadmill when the sound hit. The reaction was instantaneous and unmistakable. He dropped into a crouch, hands up, eyes scanning for threats. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before he caught himself, straightened up, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. But in those 3 seconds, I'd seen something else. His sweatpants had pulled up slightly during his reflexive movement, and I caught a glimpse of what he'd been hiding all these months. His left leg, from just below the knee down, was prosthetic. The pieces clicked into place so fast it made my head spin. The routine, the discipline, the alertness, the way he moved, the careful clothing choices. This wasn't just an elderly man staying fit. This was a veteran dealing with trauma, loss, and the daily reality of living with injuries that most people couldn't imagine. I tried to act normal for the rest of my workout, but my mind was racing. As a journalist, I'd covered veteran affairs, PTSD treatment centers, military families. I knew the signs, and now they were impossible to miss. After that day, I started seeing Walter differently. The limp wasn't age, it was adaptation. The rigid routine wasn't obsession, it was coping mechanism. The isolation wasn't unfriendliness, it was protection. Now here's where my story takes a turn that still keeps me awake at night. Because what I did next crossed every line I'd ever drawn as a journalist. I didn't just want to know Walter's story, I needed to. But getting close to someone to learn their secrets? That's not journalism. That's manipulation. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. I made a decision that I'm still not sure was right. Instead of approaching Walter as a journalist, I decided to approach him as a friend, to earn his trust, to let him share his story on his terms, if he chose to at all. It started small. I began timing my workouts to match his schedule. Instead of rushing through my routine, I'd stay on the treadmill longer, walking at his pace. I'd make casual conversation about safe topics, the weather, the gym, local events. Slowly, Walter began to open up. Just a little, but enough to let me know he was human beneath the careful facade. "You work around here?" he asked one morning, the first personal question he'd ever asked me. "Downtown. I'm a writer," I said, choosing my words carefully. Not technically a lie, but not the whole truth either. "What kind of writing?" "Stories about people mostly. Local interest pieces. Again, not entirely false, but deliberately vague." He nodded, seemed to consider this. "Must be interesting, hearing people's stories." "It can be. Everyone has a story, you know? Sometimes the most interesting ones come from the people you'd least expect." Something shifted in his expression. "Most people don't want to hear the interesting stories. They want the easy ones." That comment stayed with me for days. There was weight behind it, pain that went deeper than physical scars. What happened next would test every ethical principle I'd learned in journalism school. Because Walter was about to trust me with something precious, his story. And I still hadn't told him who I really was. The guilt was eating me alive, but the story he was about to share would prove that some truths are too important to let slip away. Our conversations grew longer, deeper. Walter began arriving a few minutes early, leaving a few minutes later. We'd talk about books, current events, life in general. He was intelligent, well-read, thoughtful, clearly educated, though he never mentioned college or formal training. One morning, he asked about my writing again. "These stories you write about people, do you ever write about veterans?" My heart jumped. "Sometimes. Why?" "Just curious. Most people who write about veterans get it wrong, make us all heroes or all victims. Reality's more complicated." "How so?" He was quiet for a long moment, then, "Heroes don't usually come home, and victims don't usually make it through what we made it through. Most of us are just somewhere in between." That's when I knew I was in too deep to turn back. The journalist in me was screaming to pursue this story. The human in me was falling into genuine friendship with a man who clearly needed someone to talk to. "Were you in the military?" I asked, as gently as I could. Walter's pace on the treadmill didn't change, but I saw his knuckles whiten as his grip tightened. "Long time ago." "Vietnam?" A longer pause, then, barely audible, "Yeah." We walked in silence for the rest of our workout. I didn't push, didn't ask follow-up questions. Let him process, let him decide how much he wanted to share. The next morning, he was waiting by treadmill 7 when I arrived. "You asked about Vietnam yesterday," he said without preamble. "I did. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. Most people say that, then they keep asking anyway." "I'm not most people." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "No, I guess you're not." This is the moment when Walter decided to trust me, really trust me. And what he was about to share would shake me to my core. Because this wasn't just a war story. This was a story about the exact moment when everything that mattered to him was taken away. And I was the first person he'd ever told. We started walking, same pace, same routine, but the energy was different. Walter was preparing to go somewhere he hadn't been in years. "I was drafted in 1969, he began, his voice steady but distant. 19 years old, fresh out of high school. Thought I was invincible, like all kids that age." "What did you do over there?" "Combat engineer. We cleared mines, built bridges, blew things up when we needed to. Dangerous work, but somebody had to do it." I wanted to ask about his leg, but I waited. Let him tell it his way. "Had a good unit. Guys you could trust with your life, you know? We looked out for each other." His pace slowed slightly. "There was this one mission, spring of 1971. Intelligence said the North Vietnamese were moving supplies down a trail about 15 clicks from our base. Our job was to set up an ambush, cut off their supply line." Walter's breathing had changed, not from exertion, but from the effort of remembering. "We'd been out there 3 days, nothing. Then, on the 4th morning, our point man spotted movement. Looked like a supply convoy, maybe 12, 15 guys." He stopped talking for a moment, staring straight ahead at nothing. But it wasn't a convoy. It was a trap. They knew we were there, had been waiting for us to make our move. The treadmill kept humming, but Walter's world had shrunk to that jungle trail in 1971. First explosion took out our radio man. Second one got our medic. I was trying to get to Johnson, kid from Ohio, couldn't have been more than 18, when I stepped on the mine. His voice never wavered, but I could see the cost of telling this story in the lines around his eyes. Woke up 3 days later in a field hospital, left leg gone from just below the knee. Johnson didn't make it. None of them did. I need you to understand what happened next, because it reveals something about trauma that most people never see. Walter didn't just lose his leg that day. He lost his entire sense of purpose, his identity, his reason for being. And what he told me next about coming home would break your heart. "The leg was the easy part," Walter continued, "and I nearly stumbled on my treadmill." "Easy?" "Physical therapy, learning to walk again, getting fitted for prosthetics. That's just mechanics. The hard part was coming home. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You ever hear the phrase survivor's guilt?" I nodded. It's not just guilt that you lived when others didn't. It's guilt that you get to have a life at all, that you get to worry about mundane things like grocery shopping and car payments, when the guys who should be here, the good guys, are gone forever. His voice got quieter. Johnson was going to be a teacher, had pictures of his girlfriend, talked about the school he wanted to work at back in Cleveland. Martinez was going to take over his dad's auto shop in San Antonio. Williams was saving money to buy his mom a house. Walter's knuckles were white again. They had plans. They had people waiting for them. And I'm the one who came home. "Walter," I started, but he held up a hand. "I spent the first 10 years after I got back trying to drink myself to death. Nearly succeeded a couple times. Couldn't hold a job, couldn't maintain relationships. Every morning I'd wake up and think, why me? Why not them?" The pain in his voice was so raw that I had to fight back tears. "What changed?" I asked. "Time. And a counselor at the VA who told me something that stuck. She said the best way to honor the dead is to live a life worthy of the gift they gave you." What Walter told me next about rebuilding his life would redefine everything I thought I knew about strength, but it also forced me to confront the truth about why I was really there. And that confrontation was about to tear apart the friendship I'd grown to cherish. "So I got sober," Walter said. "Got a job at the post office. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. Stayed there 35 years. "Is that where you retired from?" "Yeah. Been retired about 8 years now." "Any family?" Walter's expression darkened. "Had a wife for a while. Good woman, patient woman. But living with someone who wakes up screaming 3 nights a week, it takes a toll." He shook his head. "She tried, I'll give her that. But I wasn't much of a husband. Too angry, too afraid to let anyone get close. Afraid I'd lose them too." "Children?" "No. Thought about it, but didn't seem fair. To them or to her." The loneliness in that admission was staggering. Here was a man who'd spent 40 years punishing himself for surviving, denying himself connection and love because he didn't think he deserved it. "Is that why you come here?" I asked. "The routine, the exercise?" "Partly. Keeps me focused, gives structure to the day, but mostly—" He paused, seemed to be deciding whether to continue. "Mostly what?" "Mostly, it's the only place I feel normal. Here, I'm just another guy trying to stay in shape. Nobody asks questions. Nobody looks at me different. For 30 minutes a day, I'm not the guy who came back when better men didn't." The weight of that statement hung between us. For months, I'd been seeing Walter as a story, a mystery to solve. But he'd been seeing the gym as a sanctuary, a place where he could exist without judgment or pity. And I was about to destroy that. Because sitting there, listening to his story, I realized I couldn't keep lying to him. The guilt was eating me alive, and Walter deserved better than being deceived by someone he'd learned to trust. "Walter," I said, my heart hammering, "I need to tell you something." He looked at me, sensing the change in my tone. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about what I do for work." His expression didn't change, but I felt him pulling away emotionally. "I'm not just a writer. I'm a journalist, investigative reporter for the Portland Tribune." Walter stopped walking, actually stopped his treadmill and turned to face me. "How long?" His voice was flat, controlled. "How long what?" "How long have you been working on a story about me?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "Walter, it's not like that." "How long?" I wasn't. Initially. I just noticed things about you, and as a journalist, I got curious. But then we started talking, and I genuinely came to care about you as a person." Walter's face was stone. "So this whole friendship, these conversations, you've been gathering material." "No, that's not—" Walter, please, yes, I was curious about your story initially, but these past few months, getting to know you, talking with you, that's been real. That's been genuine friendship. He was already gathering his things. Walter, wait, please. He turned back to me, and the betrayal in his eyes was devastating. You know what the hardest part about coming home was? He asked quietly. I shook my head. Learning that you can't trust anyone, that people will use your pain for their own purposes, that your worst moments, your private hell, becomes entertainment for people who've never sacrificed anything. That's not what this is, isn't it? You befriended a lonely old man, got him to open up about the worst day of his life, and now you've got your story. Walter, I would never write about you without your permission. I would never betray your trust like that. But you already have. I was losing him. This man who trusted me with his deepest pain, his darkest memories, was walking away. And the worst part? He was right. I had betrayed his trust, even if that wasn't my intention. What happened next would determine whether I could save our friendship, or if I'd destroyed the only connection this man had allowed himself in decades. Walter headed for the exit, but I couldn't let him go. Not like this. Walter, please, just give me 5 minutes. He stopped but didn't turn around. You're right, I said, loud enough for him to hear. I did betray your trust. I should have told you I was a journalist from the beginning. I should have been honest about my initial curiosity. Now he turned. But everything else was real. My respect for you, my enjoyment of our conversations, my genuine care for you as a person. That wasn't research. That wasn't material gathering. That was friendship. How am I supposed to believe that? It was a fair question. How do you prove sincerity after admitting to deception? Because, I said, my voice breaking slightly, I'm not going to write your story. Walter's expression shifted slightly. What? I'm not going to write about you, Walter, not without your explicit permission, and certainly not after you've asked me not to. Your story is yours to tell or not tell. I won't violate that. But you're a journalist. This is what you do. I'm also your friend, and friendship trumps profession. Walter studied my face for a long moment. You'd really walk away from a story like this? In a heartbeat. Why? Because some things are more important than a byline. Because you trusted me, and I won't compound my mistake by betraying that trust further. And because I took a deep breath. Because you matter more to me than any story ever could. Walter was quiet for a long time. The gym continued its morning routine around us, but our world had contracted to just the two of us and the weight of broken trust hanging between us. Finally, he spoke. I haven't had a real friend in 20 years. You have one now, if you'll let me be. Another long pause. No story? No story. Not unless you someday decide you want to tell it. Walter nodded slowly. I need some time to think. Of course. He started to leave, then turned back. Sarah? Yeah? Thank you for being honest, finally. I didn't see Walter for a week. Every morning I'd go to the gym hoping he'd be there, and every morning treadmill 7 sat empty. I thought I'd lost him forever. But what happened when he finally returned would teach me the most important lesson of my career and my life. 7 days passed, 7 mornings of working out alone, wondering if I'd destroyed the most meaningful friendship I'd developed in years. I'd kept my promise, not a word of Walter's story to my editor, not a single note in my files. But the guilt remained. On the 8th day, he was there. Same time, same treadmill, same routine. But something was different in his posture, his demeanor. Less guarded, maybe. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. I approached cautiously. Good morning. Morning, Sarah. How are you doing? Better. I've been thinking about what you said. I waited, not wanting to push. About friendship, trumping profession. I've never met a journalist who'd walk away from a story. Well, now you have. Walter smiled, actually smiled, for the first time since I'd known him. I've made a decision, he said. My heart jumped. Oh? I want to tell you the rest. Not for a story, not for publication, just to tell someone. I've been carrying this alone for 50 years and I'm tired. Walter, you don't have to. I want to. But I need to know you're listening as my friend, not as a journalist. Always. And so, over the next several weeks, Walter told me everything. The full story of that day in Vietnam, the faces of the friends he'd lost, the decades of guilt and isolation that followed. He told me about the nightmares that still came, about the moments of survivor's guilt that could still bring him to his knees. But he also told me about the small victories. The day he took his first steps on his prosthetic, the moment he realized he could help other veterans navigate their own recovery, the quiet satisfaction of 35 years of steady work, of being someone people could count on. Most importantly, he told me about finding peace, not happiness. He was careful to distinguish between the two, but peace with his survival, with his losses, with the life he'd built from the ashes of his former self. You know what I've learned, he asked one morning, about a month after our confrontation? What's that? Stories aren't meant to be hoarded. They're meant to be shared, not for fame or glory, but because they connect us, because they remind us that we're not alone in our struggles. I looked at him, understanding where this was going. I want you to write about me, Sarah. Not as a journalist who discovered a story, but as a friend who was trusted with one. Walter. I've been thinking about Johnson and Martinez and Williams, about how their stories never got told. And I realized that my story isn't just mine, it's theirs too. It's the story of everyone who served, everyone who sacrificed, everyone who came home changed. Are you sure? I'm sure, but I have conditions. Name them. You tell the whole truth, not just the heroic parts or the tragic parts. All of it. The ugly parts, the complicated parts, the parts that don't fit into neat categories. I can do that. And you make sure people understand that I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who survived something terrible and spent 50 years learning how to live with it. Walter, I think you're selling yourself short on the hero part. He shook his head. Heroes are the guys who didn't come home. I'm just the guy who's trying to make their sacrifice mean something. And that's when I understood the real story. It wasn't about Walter's war injury, or his survival, or even his decades of struggle. It was about how love for fallen friends, love for their memory, love for the ideals they died defending, can sustain us through our darkest moments and eventually lead us back to connection, purpose, and hope. Walter's story became one of the most important pieces I've ever written, not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it was true. True to his experience, true to his pain, true to his resilience, and true to the friendship that made it possible. But more than that, writing Walter's story taught me something about journalism that they don't teach in school. The best stories aren't the ones you hunt down and capture. They're the ones that are freely given, born out of trust and mutual respect, and the understanding that some truths are too important to remain hidden. Walter still comes to the gym every morning. Treadmill 7, 30 minutes, same routine. But now he nods to the other regulars, sometimes even strikes up conversations. He started volunteering at the VA, helping younger veterans navigate their own recovery journeys. And sometimes, when he's feeling particularly generous, he'll tell them about the journalist who became his friend and how friendship, real friendship, can heal wounds that medicine never could. So now I ask you, how many Walter Johnsons walk among us every day? How many quiet heroes carry their battles in silence, waiting for someone to see past the surface and recognize the strength beneath? Share your thoughts in the comments, because here at the Human Stories, we believe that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and honored for the battles they've fought. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these powerful stories of resilience and hope. Subscribe to the Human Stories and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest videos about the extraordinary people living ordinary lives all around us. Your engagement means everything to us. Every like, every comment, every share helps us grow this community of people who believe in honoring the hidden heroes among us. Together, we can make sure these stories of courage, sacrifice, and friendship continue to be told. Don't forget that every day a new story will come. Thank you for being part of our journey, and remember, sometimes the most important story is the one walking on the treadmill right next to you. We'll see you in the next one, where we continue to celebrate the quiet strength that surrounds us every day.